My name is Catherine Samuel, and I am a journalist from the Netherlands. I am 27 years old. I am sitting here today to share a story that will change you. But before I begin, I need you to understand something very important. What I am about to tell you is not my story. This is the story of a young Somalian woman named Nasaba Abshir. Hafsad was 22 years old. She made a choice to follow Jesus, and that choice cost her everything. It cost her her family. It cost her her freedom. And ultimately, it cost her her life. I am telling you her story because she asked me to, with her dying breath, with stones raining down on her body. Nasaba asked me to witness what was happening to her. She asked me to tell the world. She asked me to make sure that her death would not be forgotten. She asked me to call people to prayer and to action for all the Christians in Somalia who are suffering like she suffered. This is a cry for help from the underground church in Somalia. This is the voice of a young woman who was executed for her faith, and she is speaking to you through me. So please, before you continue watching, I ask you to comment below with a prayer for Nasaba, for her family, and for all Christians in Somalia. Share this video with everyone you know so that they hear Hafsad's story and understand what is happening to believers around the world. Let me tell you about what I witnessed on the day she was executed. And let me tell you why her story is demanding that we do more, pray more, and act more for the persecuted church. My name is Catherine Samuel, and I am a journalist from the Netherlands. I am 27 years old. I have been working as a journalist for 4 years, covering stories from around the world. For the past 2 years, I have been based in Somalia, reporting on what is happening in this country. When I first came to Somalia 4 years ago as a journalist, I was assigned to cover political stories and social issues. I reported on women's rights, on education, on infrastructure. I was doing my job as a journalist. I was reporting facts and staying objective, maintaining professional distance from the stories I covered. But then something changed. Something broke inside me, and I could no longer stay silent or maintain distance. 2 years ago, I began to see persecution, real persecution. I started hearing stories about Christians in Somalia, about people who had converted from Islam to Christianity, about what was happening to them. At first, I thought these were isolated incidents. But as I investigated deeper, I realized the persecution was systematic. It was widespread. It was happening everywhere, and most of the world did not know about it. I heard stories from families who had lost loved ones. I heard about men who were beheaded because they would not renounce Jesus. I heard about women who were imprisoned for life because they became Christians. I heard about people who simply disappeared and their families never knew what happened to them. I heard about conversions discovered, arrests made, trials conducted in secret, and executions carried out. And I made a decision. I decided that I could not just report these stories to international media outlets and move on. I could not just file my reports and go home. These people were dying. These people were being tortured. These people were making the ultimate sacrifice for their faith. And the world was not hearing their stories. So I began working in secret. During the day, I did my job as a journalist for an international news organization. But at night, I met with underground Christians. I listened to their stories. I documented their persecution. I wrote down their names and their testimonies. And then I sent these stories to Christian organizations around the world, asking them to pray for these believers, to advocate for them, to remember them. It is dangerous work. If the authorities discovered what I was doing, I could be arrested, deported, or worse. But I cannot stop, because these people deserve to have their stories told. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have the world know what they are suffering for their faith in Jesus. Over the past 2 years, I have documented dozens of cases of persecution. I have met Christians who have been tortured and released. I have met families who lost children. I have heard testimonies of miraculous escapes and divine protection. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has prepared me for what I witnessed a year ago. Nothing has shattered me the way the story of Hafsad Abshir has shattered me. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. We'd be honored to have you join this growing community of seekers and truth lovers. I first learned about Nasaba through a Muslim colleague who worked with me at the media outlet. This colleague was not a Christian, but he heard about a Sharia court judgment that was about to be carried out. He heard that a young woman had been sentenced to death by stoning for the crime of apostasy. She had left Islam and become a Christian. And according to Sharia law in Somalia, this crime carried one punishment: death. My colleague told me about this case, and I do not know why, but something compelled me to find out more. Something inside me, something I cannot fully explain, made me determined to learn who this young woman was. I made inquiries. I asked questions. I found out that her name was Nasaba Abshir. She was 22 years old. She had been a Christian for 1 year before it was discovered, and she was scheduled to be executed by stoning. I knew I had to find her before the execution. I had to meet her. I had to document her story. Through contacts in the underground Christian community, I was able to locate a secret church where Nasaba was hiding. It was in a basement in Mogadishu. It was hidden. It was where Somalian Christians met in secret to worship Jesus because they could not worship openly. When I entered that basement for the first time, I saw about 30 people sitting together praying quietly. The space was dark. It was cold. It was cramped. But there was something in that room that I had never felt before. There was a presence. There was a peace that did not make sense, given the danger everyone was in. I saw Nasaba sitting in the corner. She was small. She was young. She had a face that showed both fear and an incredible peace at the same time. When she saw me, she stood up. She knew I was a journalist. She knew I was foreign. She knew who I was because the Christian community had told her that I was documenting their stories. Nasaba came to me and she took my hand. She said she was grateful I had come. She said she wanted her story to be told. She said she wanted the world to know what she believed. She wanted the world to know that she had chosen Jesus. She wanted people to pray for other believers in Somalia who were suffering like she was suffering. We talked for a long time that night. Nasaba told me about her life before she became a Christian. She told me that she grew up in a Muslim family in Mogadishu. Her father was a teacher. Her mother took care of the home. She had 2 brothers. Her life was ordinary. She prayed 5 times a day like all Muslim girls. She wore her hijab. She followed Islamic rules. But inside, she had questions about faith. She had doubts about what she was being taught. When she was 21 years old, Nasaba met a Christian woman at a market in Mogadishu. This woman gave her a small Bible hidden in a paper bag. Nasaba took it home and she read it. She read about Jesus. She read about his teachings. She read about his love for people. She read about his forgiveness. And something awakened inside her. She knew she wanted to follow Jesus. Nasaba made the decision to become a Christian. She was baptized in secret. She joined the underground church. For 1 year, she lived a double life. During the day, she was a Muslim daughter in her family's home. At night, she went to the secret church to worship Jesus and to be with other believers. But then her younger brother discovered her Bible. He saw it hidden under her mattress. He reported her to their father. Her father brought her to the religious authorities, and they arrested her. Nasaba told me all of this with a voice that was calm and peaceful. She did not sound like someone who was afraid. She sounded like someone who had already made peace with what was going to happen. She told me that the court had sentenced her to death by stoning. She told me the execution was scheduled for the following week. I asked her if she was afraid. She looked at me and she smiled. She said that of course she was afraid. She said she did not want to die. She said that her body would be in pain. But she said that her spirit was at peace. She said that Jesus had promised to be with her even in death. She said that she had chosen Jesus above her own life, and she did not regret that choice. I sat there listening to this young woman talk about her own execution with such peace and such faith, and I started to cry. I could not help it. I was crying because she was so brave and so young and so full of faith. And I was crying because I knew what was going to happen to her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Before I left that night, Nasaba asked me to do something for her. She asked me to witness what was going to happen. She asked me to see it with my own eyes so that I could tell the world. She said that many people would deny that this execution was real. Many people would say it was propaganda or an exaggeration. But if I saw it with my own eyes, then I could testify that it was true. She asked me to pray for her. She asked me to pray for other Christians in Somalia. She asked me to tell the world that believers were dying for their faith in Jesus. She asked me to call people to action, to call them to prayer, to call them to remember those who were suffering. I promised her that I would do everything she asked. The following week, I made my way to the location where the execution was scheduled to take place. It was a public execution. It was meant to be a warning to others who might consider leaving Islam. The authorities wanted people to see what happened to apostates. There was a crowd gathered. There were men from the religious police. There were men who had been chosen to carry out the execution. There were citizens who had come to watch. I stood at the edge of the crowd, camera in hand, ready to document everything that was about to happen. Nasaba was brought out. She was dressed in a long black robe. Her face was covered with a black sack so that no one could see her face. She was led to a place where a hole had been dug in the ground. They put her in the hole so that her body was buried up to her chest. She could not move. She could not run. She could only stand there and wait. The men were given stones, large stones, heavy stones. The order was given to begin the execution. The first stone struck her. I heard it hit her body. I heard her scream. It was a scream of pain, of shock, of agony. It was a human scream, the scream of a young woman experiencing one of the most terrible forms of death that exists. Then another stone was thrown. And another. And another. Each stone was met with a scream or a cry or a sound of pain. But then, between the screams, I heard something else. I heard prayer. Even as the stones were raining down on her, even as she was experiencing unimaginable pain, Nasaba was praying. She was crying out to Jesus. She was saying his name. She was praying even as she was dying. Stone after stone. Scream after scream. Prayer after prayer. The sounds were mixed together, the sound of stones hitting flesh, the sound of human agony, the sound of faith, the sound of a young woman calling out to the God she had chosen above her own life. I stood there with my camera documenting it, and I was shaking. I was crying. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the camera. Part of me wanted to look away. Part of me wanted to run. But I did not. I stayed. I witnessed. I documented. I honored the promise I had made to Hafsad. After what felt like an eternity, the stones stopped. The screaming stopped. The praying stopped. Everything stopped. Nasaba was dead. Her young life had ended. She was gone. The crowd dispersed. The men left. The authorities left. And I stood there alone in that place, tears streaming down my face, and I wept. I wept for Nasaba. I wept for her family. I wept for the other Christians in Somalia who were facing the same fate. I wept because I had witnessed something that no person should ever have to see. And I wept because I knew that Hafsad's courage and faith had changed me forever. 4 days after that execution, I could not work. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I kept seeing the image of Hafsad in that hole. I kept hearing her screams. I kept hearing her prayers. The trauma of what I had witnessed was overwhelming. But as the days passed, something happened. The trauma began to transform into purpose. I realized that Nasaba had given her life for a reason. She had asked me to witness so that I could tell the world. And I realized that I had to honor that request. I had to tell her story. I had to make sure that her death was not meaningless, that the world would know about her sacrifice. So I took the footage I had recorded. I took the testimony I had documented. And I began reaching out to Christian organizations around the world. I sent them Nasaba's story. I sent them photos. I sent them the documentation of her execution. I asked them to pray for her, to remember her, to advocate for Christians in Somalia. And I made a commitment that day. I committed to continuing this work. I committed to finding other stories of persecution. I committed to documenting the sacrifices that Christians in Somalia were making. I committed to being a voice for those who had been silenced, to be a witness for those who had been forgotten. Over the past year since Hafsad's execution, I have documented many more cases of persecution. I have met a man named Rashid who was beaten so severely that he lost the sight in one eye because he refused to renounce Jesus. I have met a woman named Sarah whose entire family was arrested because her conversion to Christianity was discovered. Her husband was executed. Her children were taken from her. She does not know if they are alive or dead. I have met a young boy named Kareem who was only 16 years old when he was imprisoned for being a Christian. He spent 3 years in prison being tortured. And when he was finally released, he was so damaged physically and emotionally that he could barely function. But he still believed in Jesus. He still had faith. I have documented dozens of these stories. And each one is a story of sacrifice. Each one is a story of courage. Each one is a story of faith that costs everything. But I have also seen something else. I have seen the resilience of the underground church. I have seen believers who meet in secret to worship Jesus despite the danger. I have seen Christians who share their meager food with other believers, even though they have almost nothing themselves. I have seen people who have lost everything, their families, their homes, their safety, but who have not lost their faith. The work I do is difficult. The stories I hear are heartbreaking. The reality of persecution in Somalia is brutal and undeniable. But I continue to do this work because I believe it matters. I believe these stories need to be told. I believe the world needs to know what is happening. And I have a message for Christians around the world who are watching this testimony. I have a message for people who live in countries where you can worship Jesus openly, where you can go to church without fear, where you can talk about your faith without risking your life. You are privileged. You have a freedom that most of the world does not have. And with that freedom comes a responsibility. You have a responsibility to pray for your brothers and sisters in Somalia and in other persecuted nations. You have a responsibility to advocate for them. You have a responsibility to speak up for them. You have a responsibility to remember them. Nasaba was a young woman who gave her life for her faith in Jesus. She was executed by stoning because she would not renounce her belief in Christ. But her death was not the end of her story. Her story lives on. It lives on in the hearts of other believers who are encouraged by her courage. It lives on in my heart as I continue to document the persecution of Christians. It lives on as I call the world to prayer and to action. I am asking you to pray for the Christians in Somalia. Pray for their safety. Pray for their strength. Pray for their faith to remain unshaken even in the face of terrible persecution. Pray for the gospel to spread in Somalia despite the danger. Pray for other young women like Hafsad who might be considering following Jesus, that they would have the courage to take that step despite knowing the cost. I am asking you to recognize the incredible privilege you have. Every time you worship Jesus openly, remember that there are believers who cannot do that. Every time you pray without fear, remember that there are believers who must pray in secret. Every time you read the Bible, remember that there are believers who would die to have a Bible. My name is Catherine Samuel. I am a journalist from the Netherlands. I have witnessed the persecution of Christians in Somalia. I have seen their suffering. I have seen their courage. I have seen their faith. And I am dedicating my life to making sure that their stories are told, that their sacrifice is remembered, and that the world knows what is happening to believers in countries where Christianity is forbidden. Nasaba Abshir, you are with Jesus now. Your suffering is over. Your pain is finished. You are at peace. And your story will live on. Your courage will inspire generations of believers. Your faith will be remembered, and your death will not be in vain. To everyone who is watching this, I ask you to join me. Join me in prayer for the persecuted church. Join me in advocating for religious freedom. Join me in remembering those who have given their lives for their faith in Jesus. Join me in being a voice for the voiceless. Because in Somalia, and in many other countries around the world, there are believers who are facing persecution, torture, and death for their faith. And they need us to remember them. They need us to pray for them. They need us to stand with them. Nasaba needed someone to witness her story. And I was there. Now I am asking you to witness it too. I am asking you to let her story change your heart the way it changed mine. I am asking you to let her sacrifice move you to action, because faith that costs everything is faith that is real, and those who have that faith deserve to have their stories told.